I used to love to hunt bugs. I was like most other boys in the second grade. And once in a while, I found a caterpillar during my hunts, and I put it in an old mayonnaise jar, punch holes on the metal lid. All of you have done this at some point, right? Put leaves in, twigs, there to make it feel at home. I wanted to observe firsthand the mystery of becoming. So every day I would look and see how much progress that caterpillar had made. The cocoon would form over time, and eventually the butterfly would come out after a struggle. I would then take the jar outside and open the lid and expect it to just fly away. However, I learned that the exoskeleton and the wings are still wet. The newly emerged butterfly is very vulnerable to predators at that point. So I had to patiently wait. It would dry out. Then it would fly away. That moment of newness, full of struggle and potential, might take hours. Life is like this sometimes. It's not about clear-cut stages. Do this, and then this will happen. Sometimes it is the in-betweenness that leaves us in vulnerable spots. But it is from these moments that we take flight. So about 12 years ago, I went to Boston for an interview to get to the next stage in my ordination process. I thought once I passed that cocoon of an interview, I would officially get my wings and magically become a minister. Well, in that interview, I stuttered, I froze up and blanked. And I distinctly remember one question they asked. They asked me to articulate my theology. And I said that I was somewhere between an atheist and a theist. There was a lot of silence. They wanted me to say more, and I didn't get that cue or something. So I did not pass the UUA's Regional Subcommittee on Candidacy, also called the RSCC for short, and was told to come back in a year. It felt like I had been kicked in the stomach. All this money that I was spending on seminary, was it going to be wasted? My calling, was it real? Should I just quit now? I went outside and noticed the horrible, cold, wet wind of early winter in Boston. No time to grieve now. I had a train to catch. On the way, I passed a UU church and a statue of the Unitarian minister, William Ellery Channing, and I felt like a failure. I got on a train to Chicago and still felt the bitter, cold, and nasty winds of that interview. I tried to journal, and I just could not write because my thoughts swirled so violently within my head. I felt ashamed, alone, rejected, and that I was letting down my wife, my minister, my mentors, and my seminary. Hours later, the sun set in western Massachusetts, and I looked out of the window as the train pushed forward into the dark night. I saw the occasional light flicker in the distance. Those lights were a sign to me that people were out there somewhere in the darkness of the night. We had a layover in Albany. I wanted to get off that train, stretch my legs, get some food. And so I asked the woman who was sitting next to me if she wanted to join me. We walked out of the train station and got a slice of pizza. She told me she was from Maine, traveling to California to visit and possibly live with her aunt. She asked me what I was doing on this train. I took a long pause, vulnerable, like a fresh, wet butterfly. I could barely talk, but I uttered something like, "Me, I'm a failed Unitarian Universalist minister." I went on to explain my situation and how ashamed I felt. She listened and said, "You don't seem like a failure to me. You can go back in a year, can't you?" The way she listened and those hopeful yet realistic words made my wings start to dry, and I knew the ability to fly was imminent. I should have talked to her hours before. But instead, I suffered through the whole length of Massachusetts, which is a long state. I was thinking I was the only person in the world to have a career setback. For the next few months, I went into my vulnerability. I told people at my seminary, my church, the UUA, and then I heard other ministers' stories that they didn't get passed on their first try either. I was not alone. By the way, that body that held me back 12 or so years ago, the RSCC, no longer exists for ministerial candidates. My minister and my mentors and friends, we wrestled and we came up with a plan of action. And as you know, because I'm up here today on this pulpit, there's a happy ending to the story. The next year I went back to Boston. It was cold and wet still, I remember. And I was prepared and I was confident in my calling, and I passed. But that initial vulnerable moment with the stranger on that train, I can't even remember her name, it was what sparked a commitment to return to my calling. Many healthy and creative people equate vulnerability as the catalyst for courage, for compassion, and for connection. So vulnerability is at the core of who we want to be in the world. So why aren't we more emotionally vulnerable? Well, we don't want to overshare. We don't want to overburden anybody. Maybe we don't feel like we can tell the person sitting next to us on the train our pain. Sometimes it's related to shame. We think we may have behaved stupidly and feel bad about ourselves. We can't open up. We can't expose ourselves. Our culture wants us to man up, to be rational and be strong. But we are emotional beings that need time and space for our wet wings to dry. What is the alternative to being vulnerable? Numb it with wine or ice cream? We evolved to connect. We need belonging, and we deserve intimacy. Now, we like to experience other people's vulnerability. We like to feel empathy for other people. But sometimes, we don't expose ourselves. However long we avoid being vulnerable, the longer we avoid being who we are called to be. Now, I'm not saying that we should overshare, but what I do know is that sharing authentically with trusted people in good boundaried situations, like in listening circles, the men's group we have, or check-ins at a committee meeting, they help us to heal. And it also builds community. Being vulnerability is a gift for everyone. People like us people like us who are part of a faith community, have the privilege of being vulnerable with each other. And the more vulnerable we are, the more we build trusted bonds and widen and deepen our community. People that regularly attend faith communities tend to have better health, live longer, and heal faster. I was reading one study recently that that showed those who attend religious services regularly are less likely to die from drug overdoses, alcohol-related illnesses, or suicide. These are sometimes labeled deaths of despair. States with more religious participation had fewer deaths of despair. The faster religious attendance falls, the more those kinds of deaths rise. In fact, whenever a state repeals blue laws so more businesses are open on Sundays, the more church attendance drops, and deaths of despair rise in the years to follow. In this study I was reading, private prayer or meditation does not have the same health benefits. So the health benefit is not the individual spiritual practice, and it's not about an individual belief. Rather, it's the interpersonal connections we share with each other. Part of what makes this gathering fulfilling and meaningful is not me. It's us, our connection to one another. We become more intimately connected when we are vulnerable with each other. Now, we live in a disconnected world, though ironically more connected with technology. Being vulnerable may expose our cracks, but it makes us more human. Hearing each other's stories gives us the gift of empathy. Showing up as ourselves, we create sacred spaces of love and compassion. You belong here. You are worthy of love and even joy. In fact, I invite you to say to the person next to you, you belong here. Go ahead. Or a person near you. Good job. You belong here. You are worthy of love, even joy, because you are a child of the universe. You are a child of mystery. And here, we do not have to put on masks. We can be who we are. Another way to be vulnerable is to deliberately do something that you are not good at. Recently, I've been taking ear training and voice lessons. This is something I'm not good at, but I am getting better at. It's okay to grieve. It's okay to feel shame. We don't have to minimize our vulnerability, but embrace it as part of the process of taking flight. So let's admit that we don't know something. Let's allow our vulnerability to be seen. This is a community of vulnerability without answers. In our connections, we nurture each other. The spiritual growth we expect is not possible without vulnerability. Just as the butterfly cannot fly without drying its wings first. Embracing life as a process is cuddling with risk and hugging uncertainty. Don't bottle it all up in a cocoon. Have the courage to embrace your vulnerability and talk to me, your pastoral care team, your friends, or perhaps even a stranger on a train. The hope of a listening ear and the kindness of a thoughtful word might be just what you need to dry your beautiful wings so that you can take flight. Vulnerability, after all, is our greatest strength. So may it be. Amen.